We are truly social animals, and that means that the pandemic goes against a lot of our instincts.
So I must tell you this afternoon that we've been informed today that in addition to spreading more quickly, it also now appears that there is some evidence that the new variant, the variant that was first identified in London and the southeast, may be associated with a higher degree of mortality. It's largely the impact of this new variant that means the NHS is under such intense pressure.
State Health Officer, with my full support, has issued an order requiring face coverings to be worn in all indoor businesses and public settings.
We're going to see by far the darkest days of this pandemic between now and next spring when vaccine becomes available. Do not be at all surprised when we hit 200,000 cases a day.
About living, not just surviving, we want to be able to enjoy our lives, not just be stuck at home or panicking to leave and go out.
I understand people's frustrations, I understand people's anxieties, but there is no doubt in my mind that schools are safe and that education is a priority.
Dancing, no singing, no mingling.
Again, we can't allow the Prime Minister to use up the next 2 or 3 weeks and then bring in the national lockdown that is inevitable. Do it now. That's the necessary first step to get the virus back under control.
Pfizer and BioNTech have agreed to supply their COVID-19 shot to the World Health Organization's COVAX vaccine scheme, which is aimed at lower-income countries.
Right now, the data demands a higher level of mitigation efforts to reverse this dangerous trends, to slow the spread of the virus, and to avoid the need for any economic shutdowns.
It's tough, it's draining physically.
I think, yes, it does get to us. Yes, I think long-term staff will have to come to terms with this pandemic, and I think certainly we'll probably see staff leaving the NHS because of what they've experienced.
I wish people would just take it seriously and believe us.
It's a very dangerous situation.
Ventilators. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said Sunday that he has COVID-19.
This is insane!
We're sick and tired of being abused. We're sick and tired of living in fear. You know what? You want to call me selfish for not wearing a mask?
Experts are warning that a sizable minority of people in Britain believe conspiracy theories about the coronavirus and COVID-19 vaccines.
About social get-togethers, which are limited to 2 households or a maximum of 6 people.
Look into the governments. Look at the globalist agenda.
Oh, they thought they could easily have it. Pandemics are hard. They know.
Let me be very clear. Things are going to continue to get worse before they get better. The death toll will likely top 500,000 next month. The cases will continue to mount. We didn't get into this mess overnight. It's going to take months for us to turn things around. But let me be equally clear. We will get through this. We will defeat this pandemic.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
This is a good day for WHO and a good day for global health. The role of the United States, its global role, is very, very crucial. And I send my deep thanks and warm congratulations to President Biden and Vice President Harris and to the American people.
For those inside China, this illness has turned life into a dystopian nightmare, where people have just as much fear of their government as they do for the pathogen. Back home in the West, very few people are taking the situation seriously, because from their ivory towers, this appears to be nothing more than just another media hype to drive up clicks and sell advertising space. Sadly, this dismissive attitude is a common response to the growing pandemic among many everyday citizens in the West, But this mentality overlooks the true reality of what has been unfolding in China for the past 2 months.
Economic stagnation and the handling of the global health crisis have eaten away at their optimism, and now they are taking to the streets, a decade after mass protests toppled Tunisia's longtime president, sparking uprisings across the Middle East and North Africa.
Never before has a quarantine of this scale been in place, keeping hundreds of millions of people confined to their homes, and shutting down trade and manufacturing for the economic engine of the world. Some skeptics have compared this illness to the flu, yet, military police are walking the streets with hazmat suits, and fleets of trucks are spraying disinfectant chemicals into the sky, which are measures that would only be taken if something very serious and very dangerous was out there. Governments of the world, and international organizations like the World Health Organization do not want people to panic, so they are being very careful with how they present this information to the public. But even these sources have grown increasingly gloomy as the casualty number continues to rise in China. Another important thing to recognize is that the numbers that are being reported from China are not really an accurate representation of what is happening on the ground, and this is something that the CCP admits. There has been a gap in the ability to test and count cases properly. There has been a problem with false negatives, and hospitals have been so overcrowded that they have not been able to admit anyone to determine whether they have the illness or not. Furthermore, there have been countless people who passed away before they were able to get medical care or get tested, and in most cases, these people are not listed in the official count. People who passed away before the illness was identified were simply listed as pneumonia cases, and they were not named in the official count either. This could be one of the most serious illnesses that our species has faced in generations, but the illness is not the only thing that we have to worry about. A quarantine sounds like a great idea, and if done correctly, it can be very helpful at eliminating the spread of viruses.
Thousands of Indian farmers entered the historic Red Fort complex in the capital on Tuesday, one even swinging from a flagpole to the sound of cheers as violence escalated elsewhere.
The United States, India, Brazil, Russia, and the United Kingdom round out the top 5 worst affected countries.
When we stay home from work or school because we are sick, this is an example of an individual quarantine. However, shutting down entire cities with millions of people, because a few individuals there may be sick, can actually make the problem worse, and lead to many other issues. Harsh quarantine policies like the ones chosen by the Chinese government in this particular circumstance have been known to backfire. In an environment of fear, where large groups of people are subjected to punishments and constant screenings, people are more likely to hide their symptoms and less likely to take other measures to avoid germs.
In central Moscow, Reuters reporters estimated up to 40,000 people had gathered in one of the biggest unauthorized rallies in years, though officials there downplayed the number. Protesters there chanted Putin is a thief, as well as freedom to revolt.
Global coronavirus cases surpassed 100 million on Wednesday, according to a Reuters tally. That's a staggering 1.3% of the world's population. Countries across the globe are struggling with new variants of the virus and vaccine shortfalls, while more than 2 million people have died from the disease.
The presence of social media plus a pandemic is a combination that's never been tried before. Nobody would have predicted that I and Dr. Fauci would be so prominent in, really kind of evil theories about, did we create the pandemic? Are we trying to profit from it? And on and on. So, I'm very surprised by that. I hope it goes away. The percentage that's really misled by these conspiracy theories, it's unclear to me. There's millions of messages out there, where my name or Dr. Fauci's name is used, but do people really believe that stuff? We're going to have to get educated about this over the next year and understand, how does it change people's behavior? How should we have minimized this, either, working with the social media companies or explaining what we were up to in a better way. From the foundation's point of view, the fact that he took that rescission of the global vaccine money, which is super, super important. The fact he rejoined the WHO, the fact that he's appointed smart people, the fact that Dr. Fauci will not be suppressed. They'll take full advantage of Francis Collins and Dr. Fauci, who are wonderful people. In terms of the epidemic, it sometimes felt like they were the only sane people in the US government.
But stricter measures were necessary due to a spike in infections.
Many say lockdown is increasing their poverty. Lebanon, like most countries, is juggling the need to save lives alongside the need to save livelihoods.
Think of it, and this is their new hoax.
We have contained this. I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight.
And we still yet haven't seen the ramifications of what happened from the holiday travel, from holiday gathering in terms of high rates of hospitalizations and the deaths thereafter. So yes, I think we still have some dark weeks ahead.
I don't want to be going back, over history, but it was very clear that there were things that were said, be it regarding things like hydroxychloroquine and other things like that, that really was uncomfortable because they were not based on scientific fact. The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling.
All you hear is COVID, 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 COVID. COVID, 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 COVID. That's all they put on because they want to scare the hell out of everyone.
These are the cold facts. More and more people are fighting for their lives against COVID-19 as we sit here.
We are now moving backwards, not forwards.
Greek police fired tear gas and used water cannons to disperse protesters in Athens.
We're in the very dangerous stage of the pandemic.
A country of 7 million people marked an increase of at least 13 deaths on Tuesday. Doctors have warned that hospitals are already running at full capacity.
I think it's so selfish. Actually, these rules are necessary.
As hard as those first months were for our state, these next few are going to be even harder.
I don't want to be vaccinated. I want to be free. I want to live my life. I want all my friends.
Logging online, the internet is full of rumours and false information. Views like the pandemic was fabricated by governments to control people, or the Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates wanted to use vaccines to insert trackable microchips into people.
What we're finding is in the wake of the pandemic that conspiracy beliefs may have gone mainstream, that they're no longer confined to the fringes. So around half the population isn't thinking in terms of conspiracy beliefs at all, but around a quarter are entertaining such thoughts, another quarter consistently thinking in terms of conspiracy beliefs.
Stand up now, every one of us. We must not consent to this.
If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic.
Just as countries prepare to launch mass vaccination programs, they'll also need to convince some of the population to take part.
We're not ready for the next epidemic.
I think it's a hoax.
In the midst of a historical pandemic, much of the world is looking to you for solutions, and it seems that this is no mistake, because you have positioned yourself as the Nostradamus of disease. You have done an incredible job at rebuilding your image, from a ruthless and cutthroat corporate CEO to a benevolent philanthropist and savior of the world. This is nothing new. This is a classic move from the robber baron's playbook. At one time, the notorious industrialist John D. Rockefeller was one of the most hated people in the country, due to his poor treatment of workers, his monopolization of key industries, and his influence in politics. After a massacre of striking miners in 1914, which came to be known as the Ludlow Massacre, Rockefeller's reputation was at its worst, so he decided to hire a team of propagandists to restore his public image.
The Ludlow Massacre itself, it was Ludlow, Colorado was where it was, as I said, was an awful incident where women got killed and little children got killed and burned. It was just dreadful. And the Rockefellers, of course, I'm old, but I wasn't that old. I wasn't around the day, but the Rockefellers, knowing the Rockefeller family as I do, had to be horrified.
Leading that team was public relations pioneer Ivy Lee. Lee was an early influence of Edward Bernays, who would later write the infamous book Propaganda, a textbook of mind control for tyrants and aristocrats. Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and often called the father of propaganda, in which case Ivy Lee is the grandfather. Lee suggested that the families make high-profile donations to various charities and have photographs taken of them handing out money to the commoners to make the public think that they were good-hearted and generous people. Over time, the plan worked, and has been replicated by many other aristocrats who wanted to win favor in the court of public opinion. At the time of his death, Lee was being investigated by Congress for his work with the Nazis through the company IG Farben and a proxy firm called the German Die Trust. He was also a founding member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now that the new and improved Bill Gates has dominated the headlines for years, many people have forgotten about the accusations of stealing ideas from others in your industry and then relentlessly using intellectual property laws against anyone who threatened your dominance. Your reputation was at its worst when Microsoft was caught up in an antitrust legal battle with the United States government, because you spent years developing a tech monopoly through your company. In 2001, Microsoft was forced to settle with the government and give up its monopoly of the industry, and the next year, you began shifting your time, and more importantly, your money, into the pharmaceutical industry. This time around, you have come to dominate an industry as an outsider, through stock investments and charitable organizations that are not bound to the same regulations as a publicly traded company. There is no doubt that advancing medicine is a noble cause, and it is true that investments in public health are important, but not everyone involved in the pharmaceutical industry actually has the best interests of the public in mind. As with any industry, it all comes down to the almighty dollar. There are some people in the industry who have good intentions, but judging by your track record at Microsoft, you are not someone who can be trusted. And let's not forget that just months ago, you were in the news because your relationship with the disgraced human trafficker Jeffrey Epstein was being exposed.
After Gates' name came up in connection with Epstein and MIT Media Lab, Gates gave a statement to the Wall Street Journal where he insisted he did not have any business relationship or friendship with Epstein.
Visits to the mansion, seeing each other in Seattle, flying on Epstein's plane when we all know Bill Gates has his own $40 million plane.
Now, as frightened people around the world are demanding solutions and looking to people like you for answers, you have advocated for some extremely draconian measures, including a surveillance system to track down anyone who might be infected. Of course, all of this sounds like a necessary step in a global pandemic, and this virus is a very real threat. But in China and other places where these measures have been implemented, human rights violations followed quickly after. It is also very strange that for many years, your companies and foundations have been heavily involved in a project called ID 2020, something that seems very similar to the systems you have proposed in recent interviews. You may own the corporate media, but we still have the internet, and you will be exposed.
It really gets to me when people say it's political, or that it's a fake disease, or that, you know, the Democrats this or the Republicans that, because I guarantee that the patients in these beds and the family members that are watching their loved ones die could care less what political party they belong with.
What we've also seen is that the online space provides a really fertile environment for different conspiracy theories that already existed to merge and kind of center around the pandemic. So we've seen pre-existing anti-vaccination beliefs, we've seen pre-existing concerns around 5G technology, we've seen pre-existing conspiracy theories about New World Order type conspiracies. These have all kind of merged and they've been brought together because they're suddenly all talking about one news event, and the online space gives them the opportunity to cross over between each other.
All of us, that we will be dealing as the virus uses its devices to evade pressure, particularly immunological pressure, that we will continue to see the evolution of mutants. So that means that we, as a government, the companies, all of us that are in this together, will have to be nimble to be able to just adjust readily to make versions of the vaccine that actually are specifically directed towards whatever mutation is actually prevalent at any given time.
British national hero and record-breaking fundraiser Captain Tom Moore has died aged 100.
I think, as far as I'm concerned, always be optimistic. Whatever you're talking about, be optimistic, because it's a good day. I mean, things will get better.
Tonight at 6 o'clock, a lapsed lockdown tradition revived. The Prime Minister asked people to come onto their doorsteps and clap for Captain Tom and for the NHS. It happens as the government tries to preserve the benefits of the vaccine rollout against mutations of the virus that threaten to undermine progress. So, in Maidstone, Kent and 7 other selected sites across England where the South African variant has been spotted, volunteers and emergency services joined forces to distribute testing kits door to door.
The idea that people think it's okay to abuse the likes of Captain Tom and his family after they raised £39 million for this country, the NHS, that they think they can abuse Marcus Rashford and the black footballers, that they think they can do this with impunity and not have to suffer any consequences for it, and never think about the misery that they inflict on their targets. Well, I can tell you, you inflicted it on the Moore family in their darkest moment. You really did make it worse, and I think that is despicable.
Let's not allow room for trolls, though, this morning.
No, let's not. But let's not let them also get away with this kind of behaviour, and let's just be better as a country, and let's not do this. You know, the rest of this programme, we won't mention these idiots, but we should recognise the impact that those words can have on families when they are losing a loved one as great as Captain Tom. And I think that they should think about what they did.
In the words,
be better than that.
In the words of Captain Tom Moore, rather than the trolls, he said, I think that you really have to look forward to things being better. I've always said tomorrow is a good day all my life. I've been an optimistic person. I think if you've had a bad day or two, things will certainly get better. And in my life, they always have.
At least one White House official who used the term Kung Flu, referring to the fact that this virus started in China. Is that acceptable? Is it wrong? Are you worried that having this virus be talked about as a Chinese virus, that might?
I wonder who said that. You know who said that?
I'm not sure the person's name, but would you condemn the fact?
Say the term again.
A person at the White House used the term Kung Flu. My question is, do you think that's wrong? Kung flu. And do you think using the term Chinese virus, that puts Asian Americans at risk, that people might target them?
No. I think they probably would agree with it 100%. It comes from China.
In the search for clues to the origins of COVID-19, China's bat caves need exploring to chase genetic elements of the virus. That's the recommendation from a member of the World Health Organization-led team investigating the virus in the Chinese city of Wuhan. The team in Wuhan had been receiving new information about how the virus led to a pandemic.
Hong Kong's freedoms will be preserved, and Hong Kong's vibrancy and core values in terms of the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary, the various rights.
37-year-old Chang Chan was found guilty on Monday of picking quarrels and provoking trouble, the lawyer said.
There's no evidence to suggest it emerged from a lab, but they were examining the potential link to bats.
More than 10,000 people spilled onto the streets. Protesters have called for reversing the changes the king made shortly after taking the throne, which included taking personal control of the palace fortune and some army units. They say the monarchy has helped enable decades of military domination in Thailand.
We are marching to a royal household because we want the king to know what the people want from him.
It's no wonder that in Hong Kong, that other supposedly autonomous region, Beijing's new sedition law has triggered fears from the millions opposed to Chinese authoritarianism that their city, for so long a lone beacon of democratic freedom in China, will go the same way as Xinjiang and Tibet.
It confirms one country, one system.
The draconian law, again introduced as the rest of the world was focused on the pandemic, has pretty much put an end to mass protests.
Hong Kong police arrested more than 300 people on Wednesday as protesters took to the streets in defiance of sweeping security legislation introduced by China. Police fired pepper pellets before arresting protesters inside and outside the luxurious Times Square shopping mall.
China has come under fire for its early handling of the pandemic, with Beijing accused of failing to warn the world about how bad the situation was. Since the first cases of COVID were detected in Wuhan last December, the disease has spread worldwide, affecting more than 18 million people and killing over 1.7 million.
Hong Kong's government has denied the postponement had political motivations.
There have been several violent incidents along China's disputed frontier with India. China appears to be picking fights everywhere and retaliates forcefully against countries which it views as xenophobic.
Potentially sparking new anti-Beijing protests following last year's often violent unrest, which plunged Hong Kong into its deepest turmoil since it returned to Chinese rule in 1997.
One scenario being scrutinised more closely by the team is the possibility that the virus could have been circulating long before it was first identified in Wuhan at the end of 2019. The investigators have so far visited hospitals, research facilities and the seafood markets where the first outbreak was identified.
Officials say the new law on secession, subversion, foreign interference and terrorism will only affect a small number of residents.
It will never be subsumed by the authoritarian China. There will always be resistance. And I'm confident in our young that they have been awakened. And the extent of the awakening is astonishing.
I think the right thing to do is wait to see it, but as we've made clear, if it is as we expect, then it would be not just a challenge, as she said, to the joint declaration, it would be a violation of the joint declaration. It would undermine the autonomy of the people of Hong Kong and the freedoms.
Such restrictions can have the effect of increasing fear and stigma with little public health benefit.
Hong Kong is a free and diversified society. We respect differences in opinion.
It is no secret that the Chinese government actively controls the flow of information going both in and out of their borders. This fact is so well known that we call it the Great Firewall of China. China has also become much more wealthy and influential over the years, which has allowed them to control how events in the country are covered in the rest of the world as well, as we saw with the coverage of the recent protests in Hong Kong. Now, this same censorship apparatus in China is working to suppress information about the spread of the deadly coronavirus and the conditions that are being seen inside the quarantine areas.
I think we should definitely see this as a marathon, not a sprint, and we need to have our entire response based on that.
Even now, the government is doing its best to downplay the severity of the situation by controlling the media statements and deleting any information from social media that contradicts their official claims. The official numbers from the Chinese government suggest that there have only been a few deaths and a few hundred confirmed cases, but videos and photo footage that have been sent to anonymous shows a far different situation unfolding within the quarantine zone. Footage taken from the contamination zones shows overcrowded hospitals filled with sick and concerned citizens, and other videos show a significant number of infected people dropping over the street. This is the type of footage that the Chinese government has been desperately trying to wipe from the internet. In fact, some Chinese citizens have even been arrested for spreading information about the virus. This is not unusual behavior for the Chinese government, as a very similar cover-up took place during the SARS outbreak nearly 20 years ago.
The Chinese doctor is dead, and soon more than 700 others will die of severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS.
SARS is also a coronavirus, but the new form seems to be more virulent and deadly, even though official statements have suggested otherwise.
If we want to have a free 21st century and not the Chinese century of which Xi Jinping dreams, the old paradigm of blind engagement with China simply won't get it done.
There are a variety of different reasons for a cover-up of this nature to take place. Perhaps it could be to prevent panic or avoid internationally imposed sanctions or quarantines, but some researchers have been raising questions about the origin of the illness and suggesting that it could have escaped from a nearby biolab. Within the past few years, a new biolab tasked with studying the most dangerous pathogens on Earth began operating in Wuhan. The lab was officially working with different strains of coronavirus, as well as other deadly illnesses like Ebola, beginning in 2018. This lab is just 20 miles away from the Guanan seafood market where the first case of the coronavirus is believed to be transmitted. Since before the lab opened, scientists all over the world were voicing concerns about the potential dangers. An article was even published in the science journal Nature in 2017, detailing the plans for the lab and sharing expert opinions about how a dangerous bug could leak from the facility. In fact, the SARS virus has escaped from high-level containment facilities in Beijing multiple times.
Back in 2003, when we had the SARS outbreak, the Chinese government did put a temporary ban back then as well.
It is far too early to tell exactly what is happening at this point, but Anonymous has been receiving tips from all over China about the severity of the outbreak and the cover-up that is taking place behind the scenes. To bring this important news to the world, we must make enough noise to overcome the Great Firewall of China. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.